Good morning. So this morning I'm going to talk about Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva Way, continue to talk about it, chapter 6 on cultivating patience. So there are a lot of sections to this chapter, so I think we might end up having like 10 talks or something like that. So gird your loins. Here we go. First of all, I want to talk about, just want to go through the topics of the sections of chapter 6. So the first one we're going to talk about today is called Reasons to Practice. The second one is called Acceptance of Problems and Difficulties as a Means to Build Practice. Next is Considering that Actions are the result of causes and conditions and dependent origination. Then we have Acknowledging that our karmic situation is also responsible for suffering, followed by Remembering the No Self of Self and Exploring Harm. The next one is Examining why we become upset about harm inflicted upon our possessions or people we are associated with. Then Cultivating Patience when enemies are praised by others and we are not. Transforming ill will towards a person who obstructs gaining merit into an opportunity to increase merit. And finally, developing compassion towards and the desire to benefit all beings. So those are the topics that are covered in this chapter as a way to cultivate patience. And so Shantideva talks to us about how we can actually take these practices and work with them and develop patience by doing so. Okay, so the first 12 verses are the ones for reasons to practice. So what I've done is distilled this down into what I consider to be the primary theme of this section of Guide to the Bodhisattva Way. And the theme of it is the reasons to practice. So I'm only going to cover, actually, talk about, I think, 3 verses in here out of the 12, but we'll understand, hopefully, from those 3, the kind of guiding principles here that he's talking about. Okay, verse 3 is, my mind will not experience peace if it fosters painful thoughts of hatred, anger. I should find no joy or happiness, unable to sleep. I shall feel unsettled. And then verse 8 says, therefore, I should totally eradicate the fuel of mental unhappiness, for this unhappiness has no other function than to cause me harm. Okay, so let's explore what he's saying there as a means to kind of talk to ourselves about why we want to do this and how we understand the nature of suffering. Okay, so if you think about the times that you're plagued with some kind of unresolved situation, sometimes we really want that situation to go away, or maybe you want to get something. So remember, I've decided I'm going to talk about this not just from the perspective of anger, but also from the other places like greed, jealousy, maybe something like that. So the other things that we get kind of freaked out about and we suffer over as human beings. So we have these kinds of unresolved situations that kind of drive us nuts, or we can't get something that we really want. We can't get rid of something that we don't want. And then so we're kind of plagued by this with dissatisfaction and unrest. So if you've had this kind of emotion, you might have experienced it as being really strong. And that, and if you're like, say you're angry, you just don't know what to do with the energy that you have. You're so upset about it. Or maybe you feel like you're going crazy, and you want to run laps around your living room or you can't sleep. So, if we're caught in greed, if we're caught in some kind of addiction, it's the same thing. So both of these situations are really difficult to work with, and they are hard on our bodies and minds, right? I mean, they're literally difficult for us. They can make us sick. So we become, if you will, using Shantideva's language, we become sick with discontent. So we can't find peace. Now, we get upset because we think that somebody else should change, right? So we think that it's somebody else who's causing our suffering, or some other situation that's causing our suffering, and that we're suffering because we can't control it. We can't make that situation or make that person act the way we want them to act. So really, the only way that we can find relief from this is to change ourselves, to change the way that we're looking at the situation. So now, when I say this, if you really think about this, this will not make you happy, right? Because some part of you will go, but wait, I don't want to change me. The other person is the problem. It's not me. But here the teaching is no, actually, if your mind is disturbed, it's because you have lost your equanimity and the other person didn't take it away from you. You have done it to yourself. So this is kind of a tough love teaching in Buddhism. And most of us don't particularly like this teaching because it requires that we really examine the nature of our delusion. So you might think of a lot of situations to counter what I'm saying, and I'm trying to figure out ways to counter your countering, right, in this talk, so I don't have to hear so much about the countering. But what we're being taught here by Shantideva is the Dharma of transformation of our delusional thinking, in which we expect the world to change to accommodate our own suffering, our own needs. So, so part of this discernment is discerning a situation in which this kind of thinking, delusional thinking, is arising. And then so a way to do this is, I always feel like if I'm becoming agitated about something, that's a clue. So just start there. If you find yourself getting agitated and losing your equanimity, then that should wake you up. You ought to say to yourself, there's a problem here. Maybe I'm looking at this in a way that isn't necessarily the most helpful way I could look at it. Because if we're getting agitated, we're losing our, equanimity, chill, way to deal with the situation. So even if somebody's doing something harmful or cruel in that situation, we still have to find our own equanimity as a way to respond to it. So this teaching is not about not responding. The teaching is about cultivating a kind of mindset that allows you to respond more skillfully to what's going on. It's about finding peace. It's about finding mental stability, and then to respond to a situation as skillfully as you can. So, as Shantideva said, if we don't do this, then we can't sleep. We spin out into all these stories about things, and we become ill with distress. So that's a problem. So in the Dharma, we want to discern our disquieting, and we want to discern our own delusion, and we want to find equanimity by quieting our minds, not by making someone else do our bidding. So again, this doesn't mean that you just go along with a situation where somebody else is inflicting harm upon yourself or others. And it might even mean that you're not necessarily as skillful as you could be. You might not have complete equanimity when you respond. But that's the goal of our practice, is to create this kind of mental stability. So when we do respond to something, we can respond in a skillful way. So like, for example, if somebody's doing something and you need to set boundaries, do you set boundaries with compassion and skill? Or do you set boundaries in this punitive, cruel way because you're having this knee-jerk response to what's going on and you just kind of want to kill the messenger? So this is why we need to cultivate this kind of mind, not to harm others, but also so that we have mental stability as well. So I want to talk about an example, a recent example in my own life. 2 years ago, my neighbor's roof became a nesting site for seagulls. And I found this very disturbing, partly because the seagulls are super noisy. And the other reason is because I had kind of gotten into this idea that seagulls sounded like the cries of the world, like they sound like they're crying all the time or they're complaining all the time. And so, unlike Avalokiteshvara, I did not have equanimity around hearing the cries of the world. And if you sat zazen here in the morning, you know what I'm talking about. And also just today, right? They were doing their thing. So, I had a hard time with that a couple of years ago. So this year, I see that the seagulls are now collecting materials for a nest on my neighbor's roof. And so I text her and I tell her that, the seagulls are doing that again. And and I was hoping that she might do something about it, and get rid of the nesting materials before they actually built the nest. But my neighbor was not on the same page that I was, and she was basically dismissive, and so she didn't do anything about it at all. Now, here's the thing. I was trying, because I'd been so upset about it before, and because I could feel my own upset arising in that situation, it was a clue for me that I needed to step back and be really careful about how I related to her, because, I had a big attachment to her getting rid of those seagulls on her roof. So even from the very beginning of me texting her, I was working very hard at being skillful with her, and also being willing to let go of my desire for her to do what I wanted her to do. And so becoming aware of our emotions and becoming aware of our aversions, and that we have this attachment to getting the way we want, should be a trigger for us to say, okay, I need to be skillful in this situation. So I was as skillful as I could be with my neighbor. I think I was pretty skillful, but it didn't matter because maybe it mattered to me, my own equanimity, but it didn't change the situation. So I'm glad that I was able to recognize that potentially this might be a real source of suffering for me. And so whose mind needed to change in this situation? Mine, not hers. It was it was of my responsibility for my own peace of mind. It's not her responsibility for my peace of mind. So realizing that, I thought, okay, you can suffer if you want to. You can get all uptight about this, and you can, run around and, I don't know, be really aggressive on your neighbor and do all this stuff. But I also like her, but that's beside the point. But I I don't want to suffer. I don't want to do this to myself. I don't want to spend, it takes about 3 months for seagulls to make their nest, sit on the eggs, and finally, like a week ago, they left the roof. So it's been about 3 months. And actually, for me, it's been kind of interesting. I've got a pair of binoculars. I can watch the chicks grow up. I can see them making the nest. It's kind of like it's sort of fun. I've been like watching all this stuff go on, and reading some about seagulls and what they're up to. I also know, by the way, that the chances are good they're going to come back. So what am I going to do? Am I going to keep suffering over this, or am I going to let it go? So I think I'll go for the latter. Thank you very much. And I feel like that's really important, and it's part of our teachings. But also, it's just like, why be upset? Why be upset about this? So so that was my example that I wanted to give about this. I don't want to be lying in bed at night angry with my neighbor because they didn't do what I wanted them to do, or because they didn't realize that they should do this thing, or because this person was bad, or if they were only not like this, or whatever it is, any story that I can make up about what her problem was, that she didn't go along with my good and sage advice. So, it's like, this is the tough love of the Dharma. Get a grip, get a grip. This is this practice that we're engaged in. And this is the hard part about practice. You might think getting up in the morning is hard, but when you were talking about, really working with these kleshas, where you really want something to be different than it is, or you really don't like somebody, or whatever that is that's going on, it's hard. It's really hard. So Shantideva said, why be unhappy about something if it can be remedied? And what is the use of being unhappy about something if it cannot be remedied? Jocko and I had an interesting conversation about this. Okay, so what does it mean for something to be remedied? So in medicine, it refers to healing one's body and mind. And it can be coming up with a solution to a problem, fixing something. The dictionary definition of this is to treat a symptom, disease, injury, or other condition, to correct an evil, fault, or error, to redress a wrong. So Shantideva asks this question: why be unhappy about something if it can be remedied? So because that's where I immediately think should be fixed, then you should go ahead and fix it, right? But maybe he's talking about fixing inside the self, right? Maybe he's saying, in this case, he's saying work with your own mind. So if your own mind can be remedied, if you can change the way you're relating to a situation, then maybe you should go ahead and change the way you're relating to the situation and not trying to force something to happen. So should we suffer if we can use the Dharma to develop equanimity? He might be asking us that question. He might be saying, why be unhappy about something if it can be remedied? And the remedy for your unhappiness to end your suffering is to change the way you're relating to a situation, to develop equanimity, to be skillful, to cultivate compassion. So that might be what he's saying. So that also brings up another question. And then the next part here is, and he says, and why be unhappy about something if it cannot be remedied? Now, in this case, maybe that brings up the other question, which is something's outside of yourself. So we tend to put these two together, but maybe he's not actually putting these two lines together in the way that we think he might be. So here he's saying, why be unhappy about something if it cannot be remedied? So in the case of my neighbor with the seagulls, I cannot remedy that situation to my satisfaction, right? In the sense of, I think that she has to do something different in order to alleviate my suffering. But really, what am I going to do? Am I going to perpetuate my suffering, be constantly bringing up, things about what she could do or not do, or getting angry with her, or whatever it might be? But here that we are talking about something that's outside our own body and mind. So you may say to me, oh, well, what about injustice? What about when something terrible is happening? Shouldn't I do something about that? Well, I don't think he's saying no. I don't think he's saying to us that we shouldn't do anything. I think he's saying, but if you can't directly in some way come up with that, well, let me back up here. So I looked at a Tibetan teacher's commentary about this, about our unhappiness about a situation. And he said, why shouldn't we let unhappiness go? Okay, so he said, if what is the use of unhappy about something and it cannot be remedied, then let the unhappiness go, not let the desire to change something go. Okay, so I'm kind of muddling this up for you, but it's like we live in a political situation now that's very polarized, right? And we see things happening around us that are really problematic. So I don't think Shantideva is saying, if you can't directly fix that, don't do anything. What he's saying is that if you can't fix it and you're unhappy about it, let go of the unhappiness and figure out a way to cultivate equanimity so you can respond to the situation. Does that make sense? So he's not saying don't do anything. He's saying when you let go of the unhappiness, if the unhappiness can't be unremedied, then let it go. Don't hold on to the unhappiness. He's not saying don't respond to the situation. So we've been having a discussion in our board meeting about what we're going to do in response to the immigration issue. So we can do what we can do about that. But on the other hand, it's like we probably cannot directly change that situation, right? So how are we going to work with that in a way that cultivates equanimity in our response? And by cultivating equanimity, at that point, we could have a kind of clear heart and mind about how to skillfully deal with the situation. Does that make sense? And so That's what we're going for. He's not talking about not doing anything. He's not talking about standing around and watching somebody be abused, and he's not talking about allowing ourselves to be abused. He's talking about working with the remedies of our unhappiness, working with the remedies for our suffering. And if we do that, then the people that we deal with, or the situations that we deal with, we are more likely to not create harm. We are more likely to bring about a compassionate response, a skillful response, which is going to be helpful. So I will add here that, we can't always be skillful. Sometimes we have to respond, and we do our best. But having these teachings in our mind is going to have an impact for us. It's going to make a difference if we have this kind of mindset versus the mindset of, why aren't you doing what I want you to do? And I'm going to be like really crazy about it. So I kind of have another story, which is when I was in my 20s and I was demonstrating against the Vietnam War, and everybody called the police pigs, right? And I was at a demonstration, and maybe there was tear gas, I don't know, but there were cops, and they were running around with billy clubs, and they were hitting people, and we're all going, "Oh, you pigs, And this guy cop came up to me with a billy club and like put back his arm like this. And I thought, okay, this is it. I'm about to get hit. And then he stopped. He just stopped and he looked at me, and then he just left. And I thought, in that moment, I wonder if he's looking at me and saying, because he was older than I was, and saying, that could be my daughter, right? That could be, and in that moment, there was this transformation that happened in his mind about the relationship between the two of us. And this, by the way, is one of the ways that Shantideva talks about this transforming the way we understand things. Now, he wouldn't have talked about it in all likelihood using this kind of language, but it's interesting, like what happened there that this person stopped. I wasn't awake enough to be able to not call him a pig. I'm running around, like doing everything I can do to agitate and distress the people who I perceive as aggressing on me, right? And taking no responsibility for the fact that I'm running around calling these people pigs. But this guy, something happened for him where he stopped and he said, wait a minute, I'm not going to do this thing. I'm not going to hit this person with my billy club. So in the case of my neighbor and her response, again, I can't do anything about it. I'm not going to come after her or anything. So I looked at that and I said, do you want to be unhappy? Do you want to spend 3 months every time you hear seagulls being upset? And if you live around here, we're talking about every 10 minutes. You hear some seagull carrying on about something. And the answer to the question is no, I don't want to be unhappy. And here I have the tools to work with this problem so that I'm not unhappy. It's not so hard for me now because I've spent a lot of time working with Shantideva when I was younger. And so I kind of expect and know what the drill is. So it's like, I'm not too unhappy about having to do that. I'm happy to do that practice. But at first, it's a really hard practice to do because we just don't like it. We don't like being told that we have to change our mind about something in order to create we don't like being told that we're responsible for our thoughts. We don't like to be told that other people don't make us think this or that. Other people don't make us feel bad, that we are not we don't want to take responsibility for what's going on with our mental stability. And this is key to Buddhist practice, that we take responsibility and do that work, even though it's very difficult. And, if you've got a problem, you can come and talk to Jaku and I and say, I'm going absolutely nuts. I can't stand this, and we'll do our best to give you helpful dharmic advice on how to work with this. So Dogen mentions this kind of practice in Gedro Koan. He says, those who are greatly awakened to delusion are Buddhists. Greatly awakened to delusion. he's not talking about being greatly awakened to other people's delusion. He's talking about being greatly awakened to your delusion. So when we are, awakened to our own delusion, at that point, we can engage with the Dharma and make transformation. If we are in a denial about our own delusion, there's no way in hell that we can make transformation, because we can't take responsibility for it. We can't see it. We're constantly running away from it. And so that's kind of like step number one. A, B, and C is things like be compassionate to yourself and others, etc. But step number one is wake up to what it is that you're doing and try to remedy that. So it's the same teaching. The nice thing about Shantideva, unlike Dogen, is Shantideva actually gives us steps and stages. He actually gives us good practical advice about how we can do this. So so I encourage all of us to continue practicing and to engage in waking up our Buddha mind. Thank you very much.